Behind the sassy one-liners and family sitcom warmth, Gimme a Break harbored some of television's most bizarre secrets. A goldfish that died repeatedly only to mysteriously return, a live episode disaster waiting to happen, a shocking blackface performance that aired on primetime TV, and a star whose real-life struggles with cocaine addiction nearly destroyed the show. From Liza Minnelli's dramatic intervention to vacuum cleaners that defied physics, this beloved 80-second sitcom was far stranger than anyone imagined. Fact 1. The immortal goldfish. In the very first episode of Gimme a Break that aired on October 29, 1981, viewers witnessed what should have been the tragic end of Gertrude the goldfish when Nell accidentally sucked her up with a vacuum cleaner while cleaning the Kiniski house. The scene was meant to establish Nell's well-meaning but clumsy nature as she tried to get the household in order after the recent death of the family matriarch. What the writers never intended was for this single moment to become one of television's most bizarre running gags. Despite Gertrude's seemingly definitive demise in that pilot episode, the goldfish mysteriously reappeared in later episodes, swimming happily in her tank as if nothing had happened. But her troubles were far from over, because the show's writers seemed to have developed an unusual fascination with killing off this poor fish in increasingly creative ways. Gertrude met her doom multiple times throughout the series, succumbing to everything from accidental gunshots fired by the bumbling officer Simpson to toxic bathroom cleaner that somehow found its way into her tank. The goldfish deaths became so frequent that fans began to notice the pattern, and Gertrude essentially became the Kenny McCormick of 1980s sitcoms, dying and returning without explanation episode after episode. The show never acknowledged these deaths or offered any explanation for how Gertrude kept coming back to life, leaving viewers to wonder if the Kiniski family was simply replacing their goldfish with identical lookalikes, or if Gertrude possessed some sort of supernatural resurrection powers that were never addressed in the show's otherwise grounded domestic comedy format. Fact 2. Liza Minnelli's life. Saving intervention. During 1984, while Gimme a Break was at the height of its popularity, Nell Carter was battling a devastating cocaine addiction that had spiraled completely out of control behind the scenes. The situation reached its darkest point when Carter traveled to London to visit her close friend Liza Minnelli, who was performing there at the time. What was supposed to be a supportive visit between two Broadway veterans turned into a life-or-death crisis when Carter attempted to end her life by combining sleeping pills with champagne in what could have been a fatal overdose. Minnelli discovered Carter in this desperate state and immediately recognized the severity of the situation. Rather than simply calling for medical help locally, Minnelli took extraordinary action by personally arranging for Carter to be flown back to the United States and directly to the Hazelden Clinic in Minnesota, one of the most respected addiction treatment centers in the country. This wasn't just a casual recommendation or a phone call to set up an appointment later, but an immediate intervention that literally put Carter on a plane while she was still in crisis. The Hazelden treatment proved to be exactly what Carter needed, as she not only survived this suicide attempt, but also successfully kicked her cocaine habit during her stay there. Additionally, Carter lost over 90 pounds during her treatment, addressing both her substance abuse and the eating disorders that had been plaguing her throughout the show's run. This dramatic intervention by Minnelli came at a crucial time when Gimme a Break's producers were already deeply concerned about Carter's erratic behavior and rapidly deteriorating health, making Minnelli's quick thinking and decisive action potentially responsible for saving both Carter's life and the show's future. Fact 3. The dangerous live episode. On February 23, 1985, Gimme a Break took an enormous risk by performing an entire episode completely live on national television, something that was extremely rare for sitcoms during that era. The episode was called Cat Story and revolved around Officer Simpson disappearing during a torrential rainstorm while trying to rescue his missing cat named Sherlock, with everyone initially believing that Simpson had drowned in the process. NBC had originally planned to air an entire block of live episodes that night as a promotional stunt, but by the time the broadcast date arrived, all the other shows scheduled for live episodes had been canceled, leaving Gimme a Break as the only program brave enough to attempt this risky television experiment. The live broadcast created tremendous pressure for the entire cast, particularly because there were no second chances for mistakes, forgotten lines, or technical difficulties that might occur during filming. This pressure became immediately apparent when Dolph Sweet, who played Police Chief Carl Kiniski, completely forgot his final line to Nell Carter during the climactic scene of the episode. Sweet was forced to pause for several awkward seconds on live television while he tried to remember what he was supposed to say, creating an uncomfortable moment that millions of viewers witnessed in real time. What made this incident even more poignant was that Sweet was already visibly ill during the live broadcast, appearing noticeably gaunt and sickly throughout the episode due to the stomach cancer that was ravaging his body. Sweet would die just 2.5 months later, on May 8, 1985, making this forgotten line moment one of his final memorable performances and adding an unintentionally tragic element to what was supposed to be an exciting television milestone for the show. Fact 4. Death aired before burial. The timing of Dolph Sweet's death created one of the most haunting coincidences in television history, when his final episode of Gimme a Break aired just 3 days after he passed away in real life. Sweet died on May 8, 1985, at the age of 64 after battling stomach cancer that had been diagnosed during the show's 4th season. His last appearance was in an episode titled Julie's Birthday, which was scheduled to air on May 11, 1985, as part of NBC's regular programming lineup that had been planned months in advance. What made this situation particularly eerie was that Sweet's funeral took place on the same day his final episode was broadcast, meaning that while his family and friends were saying their final goodbyes at his burial service, millions of viewers across America were watching him perform on their television screens for the last time. The episode itself was a typical family sitcom installment focusing on Julie's birthday celebration, with no indication that viewers were witnessing the final performance of an actor who had already passed away. Television production schedules typically involve filming episodes weeks or even months before they air, which explains how Sweet's death and his final episode broadcast could occur so close together. The show's producers faced the difficult decision of whether to delay the episode out of respect, but ultimately chose to air it as scheduled, since it had already been promoted, and was part of the regular season finale storyline. This created the surreal situation where Sweet's character was still very much alive and celebrating with his television family, while the actor himself was being laid to rest, marking one of the most poignant examples of how television can preserve performances long after the performers themselves are gone. Fact 5. The controversial blackface episode. During the 1984-85 television season, Gimme a Break aired what would become one of the most shocking episodes in sitcom history, when young Joey Lawrence appeared in blackface makeup during a church performance. The episode, titled Baby of the Family, featured a storyline where Samantha Kaniski, feeling jealous of the attention Joey was receiving from Nell, devised a plan to get revenge by convincing the innocent child to perform at Nell's church benefit while wearing blackface makeup to sing Toot Toot Tootsie, a song originally performed by Al Jolson in blackface during the 1920s. The episode showed Joey performing this routine in front of Nell's African-American church congregation, completely unaware of the racist implications of what he was doing, since Samantha had told him that Al Jolson was actually a black performer. When Nell discovered what had happened, she delivered a powerful speech explaining to Samantha that putting Joey in blackface was equivalent to calling her a racial slur, leading to an emotional confrontation where Samantha insisted she would never use such language while learning about the harmful history of blackface performances. This episode was so unexpected and controversial that it later ranked number 38 on TV Land's list of the 100 most unexpected TV moments, cementing its place as one of television's most surprising primetime moments. What made the episode particularly remarkable was that it aired during an era when many people claimed they didn't understand that blackface was offensive. Yet here was a mainstream sitcom in 1984 explicitly addressing the racist nature of such performances and explaining why they were harmful, proving that society did indeed understand these issues much earlier than some would later claim. Fact 6. Whitney Houston's secret TV debut. A full year before Whitney Houston released her explosive debut album that would make her one of the biggest pop stars in the world, she made her very first acting appearance on Gimme a Break in an episode that aired on March 15, 1984. The episode was titled Katie's College and featured Houston playing a character named Rita, a college student who planned to start a business partnership with Katie Kaniski instead of pursuing traditional higher education, which created conflict with Nell, who strongly believed Katie should focus on her college studies. At the time of this guest appearance, Houston was still a relatively unknown singer who had recently signed with Arista Records but hadn't yet achieved any mainstream success. Her debut album wouldn't be released until March of 1985, making this television appearance a fascinating glimpse of the future superstar before anyone knew who she would become. Houston was only 20 years old during the filming and was still developing her career, having previously done some modeling work and background vocals for other artists. The episode itself was a typical family sitcom storyline, where Nell disagreed with Katie's decision to skip college in favor of entrepreneurship, with Houston's character Rita serving as the catalyst for this generational conflict about education versus business ambition. What makes this appearance even more interesting is that Houston was also being considered for other television roles during this same period, including auditions for The Cosby Show, where she was in the running to play Sandra Huxtable, though she ultimately lost that role to Sabrina LaBeouf. This brief appearance on Gimme a Break represents Houston's first and only significant acting role before her music career took off and made her a global phenomenon. Fact 7. The vacuum that defied physics. Throughout the entire run of Gimme a Break, the opening credits featured a memorable scene of Nell Carter accidentally putting the vacuum cleaner hose into the fish tank and sucking out all the water, which was meant to showcase her well-meaning but clumsy approach to housekeeping duties. This visual gag became one of the most recognizable images from the show's introduction sequence and perfectly captured Nell's character as someone who tried hard to maintain order in the Kaniski household, but often created chaos instead through her mishaps and accidents. However, anyone familiar with 1980s household appliances would immediately recognize that this scene depicted something that was completely impossible in the real world. Vacuum cleaners from that era were not designed to handle any kind of liquid, and the moment water entered the intake system, the electrical components would have immediately short-circuited, causing the machine to stop working entirely and potentially creating a dangerous electrical hazard for anyone operating it. The vacuum cleaners available during the early 1980s relied on electric motors and internal wiring that were not waterproofed or protected against moisture in any way, meaning that even a small amount of water would have caused immediate damage to the internal mechanisms. Modern wet-dry shop vacuums that can safely handle liquids weren't commonly available for household use during this time period, and even those specialized machines require specific settings and precautions to operate safely with water. The show's creators either didn't consider this technical impossibility when filming the opening sequence, or simply decided that the comedic effect was more important than scientific accuracy, creating a memorable but physically impossible moment that appeared in every episode's introduction. Fact 8. Rosie O'Donnell's cold reception. When Rosie O'Donnell joined the cast of Gimme a Break during its 6th and final season in 1986, she was thrilled to land a role on a major primetime television show, playing Maggie O'Brien, a dental hygienist who lived in the same New York City apartment building as Nell and served as her neighbor. O'Donnell had recently gained national attention through her appearances on Star Search and was excited about the opportunity to work alongside established television veterans, but her experience on set turned out to be far more difficult and isolating than she had anticipated. Rather than welcoming the newcomer into the established cast family, Nell Carter maintained a distinctly cold and professional distance from O'Donnell throughout the entire production process. Carter refused to engage in any personal conversations with O'Donnell and would only address her by her character name Maggie during rehearsals, script readings, and even casual interactions between takes, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere that made O'Donnell feel like an unwelcome outsider rather than a valued cast member. O'Donnell later revealed that this treatment made her feel snubbed and disheartened, as most of the established cast members seemed to treat her more like an interloper than a fellow actor who was trying to contribute to the show's success. When Carter was later asked about this behavior during an interview for O'Donnell's True Hollywood Story, she defended her actions by claiming that calling cast members by their character names was a deliberate technique she used to help the young Lawrence brothers focus on their lines and performances without getting distracted, though O'Donnell remained convinced that this explanation was simply an excuse for Carter's unfriendly behavior toward her specifically. Fact 9. The $2,000 a day cocaine habit. Behind the scenes of Gimme a Break's successful run, Nell Carter was battling a cocaine addiction so severe that she was spending between $1,000 and $2,000 every single day to feed her habit, an astronomical amount of money that would be equivalent to several $1,000s per day in today's currency. Carter had first experimented with cocaine while performing in the Broadway musical Ain't Misbehavin' during the late 1970s, but what started as occasional recreational use had escalated into a full-blown addiction that was consuming both her finances and her health by the time she became the star of her own television series. The show's producers became increasingly concerned about Carter's erratic behavior, rapidly fluctuating weight, and self-destructive lifestyle as her addiction worsened throughout the early seasons of the show. Carter would frequently go into rehab during production breaks, only to relapse and return to her expensive daily cocaine purchases, creating a cycle that threatened not only her own well-being, but also the stability and future of the entire television series that depended on her as its central character. The financial impact of this addiction was staggering, as Carter was essentially spending her entire television salary and more on drugs, leaving her in constant financial distress despite being the star of a successful network sitcom. This level of spending meant that Carter was purchasing significant quantities of cocaine on a daily basis, far beyond what would be considered typical even for someone with a serious addiction problem. The producers' concerns about the show's future were well-founded, as Carter's addiction was affecting her ability to memorize lines, show up for rehearsals on time, and maintain the consistent performance quality that the show required to remain successful in NBC's competitive primetime lineup. Fact 10. The mysterious mail slot. Throughout the entire six-season run of Gimme a Break, the Kiniski family's front door featured a continuity error so obvious that it's surprising more viewers didn't notice the glaring inconsistency between interior and exterior shots of their home. When cameras filmed scenes inside the house, the front door clearly displayed a brass mail slot that was prominently visible and appeared to be a functional part of the door's design, suggesting that the postal service could deliver mail directly through this slot into the family's entryway. However, whenever the show cut to exterior shots of the Kiniski house, viewers could see that the front door from the outside had no mail slot whatsoever, creating a complete contradiction between what the door looked like from inside versus outside the home. This wasn't simply a case of the mail slot being difficult to see from certain angles or lighting conditions, but rather a complete absence of any slot opening on the exterior door, making it impossible for the interior and exterior shots to be showing the same physical door. The situation became even more bizarre when observant viewers realized that the interior mail slot was purely decorative and non-functional, as there was no actual hole cut through the door for mail to pass from the outside to the inside. The brass slot that was visible from the interior was essentially just a piece of decorative hardware attached to the inside of the door, without any corresponding opening that would allow mail delivery to actually occur. This meant that the Kiniski family's mail slot existed in a state of television limbo, appearing to be present from inside the house but completely absent from outside, while also being physically incapable of performing its supposed function of allowing mail to pass through the door. Fact 11. The show that changed everything. After 5 seasons of being set in the fictional California suburb of Glen Lawn, Gimme a Break made one of the most dramatic location changes in television history when it completely relocated the entire show to New York City, just 5 episodes into its 6th and final season during 1986. This wasn't a gradual transition or a temporary storyline, but rather a complete abandonment of the show's original premise and setting that had defined it since the very first episode back in 1981. The radical change occurred because the show's creators needed to find a way to continue the series, after most of the original Kiniski family had been written out of the storyline. Katie had moved to San Francisco for a job opportunity. Julie and her husband, Jonathan, had relocated to San Jose with their new baby. And Samantha was attending college in New Jersey, leaving Nell with very few remaining connections to the original family structure that had been the heart of the show for its first 5 seasons. Rather than ending the series or finding new ways to keep the family together in California, the producers decided to have Nell move to Greenwich Village in New York City to join her friend Addie, who had gotten a job there, while also taking custody of Joey and his younger brother Matthew after their father abandoned them. This move transformed Gimme a Break from a show about a housekeeper caring for a police chief's daughters in suburban California into a completely different series about a woman raising 2 boys in New York City while working as an assistant editor for a publishing company, essentially creating an entirely new show that just happened to share the same title and main character as the original. Fact 12. The scripted disaster episode. During the production of Gimme a Break, the writers and producers decided to attempt one of the most unusual experiments in television history by creating an entire episode that had absolutely no script whatsoever, relying entirely on the unpredictable behavior of a real baby to drive the storyline. The episode featured a storyline involving an infant, but instead of writing dialogue and predetermined actions for the cast members to follow, the producers simply told the actors to improvise all of their lines and reactions based on whatever the baby happened to do during the filming process. This meant that veteran actors like Nell Carter, who was accustomed to learning scripted dialogue and hitting specific comedic timing marks, had to completely abandon their normal preparation methods and instead react spontaneously to an infant who had no understanding of television production schedules, camera angles, or the need to perform specific actions on cue. The baby could cry, sleep, laugh, crawl, or do absolutely nothing at any given moment, and the entire cast had to build their performances around these completely unpredictable behaviors. The filming process for this episode must have been incredibly challenging for everyone involved, as babies are notoriously difficult to work with under the best of circumstances, and asking professional actors to create an entire episode's worth of content around an infant's natural behavior was essentially asking them to perform improvisational theater while being filmed for national television. The directors and camera operators also had to be prepared to capture whatever happened naturally, rather than following a predetermined shot list or planned sequence of events, making this episode one of the most spontaneous and uncontrolled productions in sitcom history. Fact 13. Pat Sajak's game show crossover. During the third season of Gimme a Break, the show created one of television's most unusual crossover moments when Pat Sajak appeared as himself in an episode where Nell and her best friend Addie became contestants on the popular game show Wheel of Fortune. This wasn't simply a case of the characters watching the game show on television or making references to it in their dialogue, but rather an actual storyline where the two women traveled to the Wheel of Fortune studio and participated in the show as real contestants competing for prizes. The episode required Sajak to step outside his normal role as the host of a game show and instead play himself within the fictional world of a sitcom, creating a unique blending of reality and scripted television that was extremely rare during the 1980s. Sajak had to interact with Nell Carter and Thelma Hopkins as both their characters from Gimme a Break and as genuine game show contestants, maintaining the illusion that these fictional characters were real people who had somehow made it onto his actual television program. This crossover was particularly interesting because it combined two completely different television formats that normally never intersected, bringing together the world of primetime sitcoms with the realm of daytime game shows in a way that acknowledged both the fictional nature of Gimme a Break and the real existence of Wheel of Fortune. The episode allowed viewers to see their favorite sitcom characters in an entirely different television environment, while also giving Pat Sajak the opportunity to showcase his personality and hosting skills within a scripted comedy context, creating a memorable television moment that highlighted the versatility of both the sitcom format and Sajak's abilities as a television personality. Fact 14. The star who hated her hit show. Despite Gimme a Break being the role that made Nell Carter a household name and earned her Emmy and Golden Globe nominations, Carter developed a complicated and ultimately negative relationship with the show that had defined her television career. After the series ended in 1987, Carter made a deliberate effort to distance herself from the character of Nell Harper and the sitcom that had brought her fame, expressing frustration that audiences would forever associate her with this particular role, rather than recognizing her broader talents as a performer. In a revealing 1988 interview with the New York Times, Carter made her feelings about the show crystal clear when she stated that she didn't want to go to her grave being known as the girl from Gimme a Break, emphasizing that the character wasn't really her and that it was just a job she had taken to pay the bills. This quote revealed the deep disconnect Carter felt between her own identity as a serious actress and singer versus the public's perception of her as the sassy housekeeper character she had played for 6 years on national television. Carter's rejection of her most famous role was particularly striking because Gimme a Break had been such a significant success, running for 6 seasons and making her one of the most recognizable faces on television during the 1980s. Her desire to move beyond the show reflected her broader artistic ambitions and her frustration with being typecast in a role that she felt didn't represent her true range as a performer. Before Gimme a Break, Carter had been a Tony Award-winning Broadway actress with serious theatrical credentials, and she clearly felt that the sitcom had overshadowed her more prestigious stage work and limited her opportunities to be seen as a versatile artist rather than just a television comedy star. Fact 15. The critics' devastating review. When Gimme a Break premiered on October 29, 1981, it received what may have been one of the most brutally negative television reviews ever written by a major newspaper critic. Washington Post television critic Tom Shales was so offended by the pilot episode that he wrote a scathing review that went far beyond typical criticism and entered the realm of personal suffering, claiming that watching the show had caused him actual physical and emotional distress that warranted legal action against the network. In his review, Shales wrote that he wished he could sue NBC for the grievous consternation, intestinal distress, and aggravated low moaning that he had suffered as a result of watching Gimme a Break, suggesting that the show was so terrible that it had literally made him ill. He didn't stop there, going on to criticize what he perceived as inappropriate sex jokes and racial stereotypes embodied by Nell Carter's character, arguing that these elements made the show particularly offensive rather than simply poorly executed. Shales concluded his devastating review by stating that if he thought television could get substantially worse than Gimme a Break, he wasn't sure he would have the courage or desire to ever turn on his television set again, essentially suggesting that this single sitcom represented the absolute bottom of what television could offer viewers. His review was so harsh that it stands out even decades later as an example of how critics can express their displeasure in the most dramatic terms possible, treating a simple family sitcom as if it were a personal attack on his sensibilities and well-being, while also reflecting the mixed critical reception that the show received when it first debuted on NBC's primetime lineup.